Why emotionally intelligent people never explain themselves. Introduction. The exhaustion of trying to be understood. Some people explain themselves constantly. They explain their decisions, their emotions, their boundaries, their tone, their silence, their intentions, their existence, even after nobody asked. Even after the conversation already ended emotionally. Even after the other person clearly decided not to understand. Why? Because many people are not communicating for clarity. They are communicating for emotional safety. The nervous system believes, if I explain myself well enough, maybe I will finally be accepted. Maybe they will stop being angry. Maybe they will understand my heart. Maybe I can avoid rejection. This creates chronic over-explaining. And over time, over-explaining becomes emotional exhaustion. Because no amount of explaining can force emotional understanding from someone unwilling to see you clearly. This is one of the hardest truths emotionally intelligent people eventually learn. Understanding cannot be controlled. Some people will misunderstand you no matter how carefully you speak. Some will twist your words, project onto you, judge you through their own wounds, hear only what confirms their emotions. And if your nervous system depends entirely on being understood by everyone, peace becomes impossible. This realization changes people deeply. Especially emotionally intelligent people, because emotionally intelligent individuals eventually recognize something powerful. Not every misunderstanding deserves emotional labor. This does not mean they become cold, or arrogant, or emotionally unavailable. It means they stop trying to emotionally perform for people committed to misunderstanding them. There is a difference. Many people over-explain because they grew up in environments where emotional safety depended on self-defense. Perhaps they were constantly criticized, forced to justify feelings, blamed unfairly, emotionally invalidated, misunderstood, repeatedly punished for mistakes, forced to prove innocence constantly. The nervous system adapts quickly in these environments. The child learns, I must explain myself perfectly to stay emotionally safe. So adulthood communication becomes defensive automatically. The person explains tone, intentions, decisions, boundaries, emotions, before anyone even asks questions. Not because they enjoy explaining, because the nervous system fears misinterpretation deeply. This creates anxiety-driven communication. The person becomes hyper-aware of how they are perceived, constantly monitoring wording, reactions, facial expressions, emotional shifts, trying desperately to avoid conflict or rejection. But this level of self-monitoring becomes psychologically exhausting. Because human beings cannot feel internally free while constantly defending themselves emotionally. Eventually, emotionally intelligent people grow tired. Tired of repeating themselves, defending intentions, clarifying obvious things over justifying boundaries, chasing emotional understanding from unavailable people, and slowly, something changes inside them. They begin valuing peace more than persuasion. This transformation often looks like silence from the outside, but internally, it is emotional maturity. The person realizes, I do not need to explain every part of myself to deserve peace. That realization is powerful, because many people unconsciously believe, if people misunderstand me, I lose worth. But emotionally intelligent individuals eventually separate misunderstanding from identity. Someone misunderstanding you does not automatically mean, you are wrong, you are bad, you are selfish, you are unworthy. Sometimes it simply means, they see life through a different emotional lens. This understanding changes communication completely. Emotionally intelligent people still communicate clearly, still express honestly, still explain when necessary. But they stop emotionally chasing understanding obsessively. Why? Because they understand something most people learn too late. Endless explanation often comes from internal insecurity, not clarity. The person keeps talking because the nervous system still feels unsafe, still feels judged, still fears abandonment. This is why over-explaining often sounds emotionally desperate underneath. Not intentionally. Neurologically. The body is trying to regain emotional control, trying to stabilize social safety. But emotionally grounded people eventually learn. Self-respect sometimes sounds like silence. Especially in conversations where the other person is committed to misunderstanding, manipulation is happening, explanations are being weaponized, emotional energy is being drained endlessly. Mature people recognize when communication stops being productive. And when that moment arrives, they stop fighting for emotional validation. This confuses many people, especially emotionally reactive individuals, because emotionally reactive people often interpret silence as weakness, guilt avoidance, emotional distance. But sometimes silence is simply emotional wisdom. The wisdom to recognize, I have already communicated clearly. Repeating myself will not create understanding. This distinction matters deeply. Emotionally intelligent people are not silent because they have nothing to say. Often they are silent because they finally learned. Not everyone deserves access to their emotional energy endlessly. That realization protects the nervous system. Modern culture encourages constant self-explanation. People now feel pressured to justify choices publicly, defend boundaries publicly, explain emotions publicly, perform vulnerability publicly. Social media intensified this dramatically. Everyone now feels observed, judged, interpreted constantly. And insecure nervous systems react by over-explaining identity continuously. But emotionally intelligent people eventually detach from this pressure. They stop trying to manage every perception. Because they understand, people will create stories about you regardless. No amount of explanation fully controls another person's interpretation. This realization creates freedom. Not emotional coldness. Freedom. The freedom to speak honestly, set boundaries calmly, allow misunderstanding without panic, stop performing emotionally, trust yourself internally. This is rare. Most people remain emotionally trapped inside perception management for years, trying desperately to make everyone see them correctly. But emotionally intelligent individuals eventually understand. Peace becomes impossible when self-worth depends on universal understanding. So they stop over-explaining gradually. Not from ego. From exhaustion. From wisdom. From nervous system healing. Because perhaps the deepest truth of all is this: emotionally intelligent people stop explaining themselves constantly. When they finally realize their peace matters more than convincing everyone else to understand them perfectly. Chapter 1. Over-explaining is often a trauma response. Most people think over-explaining is simply a communication habit. It is not. Very often, it is a survival response. A nervous system adaptation created through repeated emotional insecurity. The person is not merely talking too much. They are unconsciously trying to protect themselves psychologically. This is why some individuals feel intense anxiety when misunderstood. Even small misunderstandings can trigger panic, guilt, defensiveness, emotional urgency, obsessive clarification. The nervous system reacts as though emotional danger is present. Why? Because for many people, misunderstanding once carried real emotional consequences. Perhaps as a child, being misunderstood led to punishment, expressing emotions led to criticism, mistakes led to humiliation, boundaries were ignored, intentions were constantly questioned, love felt conditional. The child learns something dangerous: I must explain myself perfectly to stay safe. This belief becomes wired into the nervous system. And adulthood communication begins revolving around emotional self-defense. The person starts over-explaining automatically. Not because they lack intelligence. Because the nervous system fears rejection deeply. This often develops in emotionally unpredictable environments. Homes where moods changed suddenly, criticism was constant, emotional safety felt unstable, parents projected anger unfairly, affection depended on obedience, emotional expression was invalidated. Children in these environments become hyper-aware of perception. They study Facial expressions, tone changes, emotional reactions, body language constantly. Trying to avoid emotional danger before it happens. This creates hypervigilance. And hypervigilant nervous systems often become chronic explainers. The person unconsciously believes, if I explain enough, maybe conflict can be prevented. Maybe rejection can be avoided. Maybe they will finally see I am not wrong. But the nervous system never fully relaxes. Because emotionally unsafe environments teach people that love and acceptance are unstable. So the person keeps defending themselves preemptively. Explaining before accusations even appear. Clarifying before misunderstandings even happen. Apologizing before mistakes are confirmed. This creates exhausting communication patterns. Many over-explainers constantly feel emotionally tense, socially anxious, misunderstood, responsible for others' reactions. Their nervous system becomes trapped in emotional anticipation, always preparing for judgment. This affects identity deeply too. The person slowly begins measuring self-worth through perception management. They feel emotionally safe only when approved, understood, validated, emotionally accepted. Any misunderstanding feels threatening internally. Even normal disagreement can trigger shame, because the nervous system interprets disapproval as emotional danger. This is why over-explaining often sounds emotionally desperate underneath. Not manipulative. Fearful. The person is unconsciously trying to secure connection and avoid emotional abandonment. Many people who over-explain are actually deeply empathetic individuals. They care intensely about fairness, emotional clarity, harmony, being understood accurately. But without healthy emotional boundaries, empathy becomes self-erasure. The person begins over-functioning emotionally in conversations, taking responsibility for everyone's emotions, everyone's interpretations, everyone's reactions. This becomes psychologically unsustainable, because no human being can fully control how others perceive them. Eventually exhaustion arrives. The person notices constant anxiety during conversations, emotional fatigue after explaining, frustration from repeating themselves, resentment toward people who never listen yet they continue explaining compulsively. Why? Because the nervous system still believes, if I stop explaining, I become unsafe. This belief often survives long after the original emotional danger disappears. That is how trauma responses work. The body continues protecting itself from old pain even when circumstances change. A person may now live among emotionally safe people, yet still communicate defensively automatically. The nervous system remembers what the conscious mind tries to move past. This is why healing over-explaining requires more than communication tips. It requires nervous system healing. The person must slowly learn, I do not need to defend my humanity constantly to deserve respect. That realization feels revolutionary for chronic explainers. Because many spent years believing, if people misunderstand me, something is wrong with me. But emotionally healthy people understand something different. Misunderstanding is part of human life. Not every perception can be controlled. Not every accusation deserves defense. Not every opinion deserves emotional energy. This is difficult for trauma-conditioned nervous systems to accept. Because emotionally unsafe childhoods often trained people to believe, conflict means danger. So adulthood communication becomes emotionally loaded. The person fears disappointing others, being disliked, appearing selfish, being misjudged, losing connection. And this fear creates endless self-explanation, sometimes even when nobody asked for one. Another important truth: over-explaining often attracts emotionally manipulative people. Why? Because manipulators recognize nervous systems desperate for approval. They exploit guilt easily. The chronic explainer keeps trying, clarifying, proving innocence, defending intentions, justifying boundaries. Meanwhile, the manipulative person keeps moving the emotional target endlessly. The conversation never resolves. Because the goal was never understanding. The goal was emotional control. Emotionally intelligent people eventually recognize this pattern. And slowly, they stop participating in endless emotional trials. They begin understanding. Healthy people do not require constant defense of your character. That realization changes relationships profoundly. Mature individuals communicate clearly once, maybe twice if necessary. But they do not endlessly beg to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding them. Because emotionally intelligent people finally realize, self-respect and over-explaining cannot coexist forever. At some point, the nervous system must choose endless emotional defense or internal peace. Healing begins when the person understands, I am allowed to exist without constantly justifying myself. That sentence feels terrifying initially for trauma-conditioned people, but over time, it becomes emotionally freeing. The body slowly relaxes. The nervous system stops preparing for judgment constantly. Communication becomes calmer, simpler, more grounded. The person no longer speaks from panic. They speak from self-trust. And perhaps the deepest truth of all is this: many people who over-explain are not weak communicators. They are wounded nervous systems still trying to earn emotional safety through perfect self-defense. Chapter 2. Emotionally intelligent people understand energy. Emotionally intelligent people do not stay silent because they are emotionless. They stay silent because they understand cost. The emotional cost of arguing endlessly. The nervous system cost of trying to convince people committed to misunderstanding. The psychological exhaustion of explaining yourself to those who only listen through ego, insecurity, or projection. At some point, emotionally intelligent individuals realize something life-changing. Not every conversation deserves access to your energy. This realization creates emotional boundaries. Healthy ones. Because energy is not infinite. Attention is not infinite. Emotional regulation is not infinite. Every argument, every explanation, every emotionally charged interaction affects the nervous system. Most people underestimate this deeply. They believe emotional exhaustion comes only from major trauma. But often, exhaustion comes from constant small emotional leaks, defending yourself repeatedly. Managing other people's reactions, over explaining simple boundaries, participating in unnecessary conflict, emotionally carrying conversations that go nowhere. Over time, these interactions drain psychological stability. The nervous system becomes overloaded. Emotionally intelligent people eventually notice this pattern. They notice how certain conversations leave the body tense for hours. How certain people create anxiety before interaction even begins. How some individuals consume emotional energy endlessly without ever truly listening. And instead of forcing connection constantly, they begin protecting peace intentionally. This is emotional intelligence. Not avoidance. Discernment. There is a major difference. Emotionally immature people often believe every misunderstanding must be corrected immediately. Every accusation must be challenged. Every opinion must be controlled. But emotionally intelligent people understand, trying to control every perception destroys inner peace. So they stop. Not because they stopped caring completely. Because they started caring about their nervous system too. This changes communication profoundly. The emotionally intelligent person asks internally, is this conversation productive? Is this person genuinely trying to understand? Will more explanation create clarity? Or more emotional chaos? These questions create boundaries around energy. Most people never learn this. They confuse accessibility with kindness. They believe healthy people should always explain, always engage, always defend, always respond, always prove themselves. But constant emotional accessibility is not emotional maturity. It is often emotional self-abandonment. Emotionally intelligent individuals understand something powerful. Access to their emotional energy is earned, not automatic. This does not make them cruel. It makes them regulated. Because emotionally healthy people understand the nervous system requires protection too. Modern life overstimulates people constantly. Notifications, arguments, opinions, demands, conflict, social comparison. The nervous system rarely rests anymore. And many people worsen this by emotionally engaging with everything. Every disagreement becomes personal. Every criticism becomes a battle. Every misunderstanding becomes emotional emergency. This creates chronic nervous system fatigue. Emotionally intelligent people slowly stop participating in unnecessary emotional noise. Not because they think they are superior. Because they finally understand. Peace requires selective attention. This is difficult initially for approval-seeking individuals, especially people raised to prioritize others' comfort over internal stability. Many people grew up learning, if someone is upset with me, I must fix it immediately. So adulthood becomes emotional overfunctioning. The person constantly manages tension, perceptions, reactions, emotional atmospheres, trying to keep everyone emotionally comfortable. But emotionally intelligent people eventually realize something painful. You cannot regulate every nervous system around you. Some people enjoy conflict. Some enjoy misunderstanding. Some project constantly. Some drain emotional energy endlessly. And explaining yourself repeatedly will not heal their internal chaos. This realization creates emotional detachment. Healthy detachment. Not coldness. The emotionally intelligent person stops trying to emotionally rescue every interaction. They begin recognizing silence is sometimes nervous system protection. Especially when the conversation is circular, the other person is emotionally reactive, manipulation is present, understanding is impossible, emotional energy is being consumed without purpose. Mature people disengage from emotional chaos strategically. This confuses emotionally reactive individuals. Because reactive people often interpret boundaries as rejection. But boundaries are not punishment. They are emotional self-respect. Emotionally intelligent individuals know prolonged emotional conflict damages the nervous system. The body absorbs tension physically. Heart rate changes, sleep suffers, thoughts race, anxiety increases. All because many people feel psychologically obligated to emotionally engage with everything. But healthy people understand. Preserving peace is more important than winning every emotional battle. This mindset changes relationships too. Emotionally intelligent people stop over-texting explanations, arguing endlessly, defending every decision, reacting impulsively, chasing validation after conflict. Instead, they communicate clearly once. Then observe. If the other person genuinely seeks understanding, healthy dialogue continues. If not, emotional withdrawal begins. Not dramatic withdrawal. Quiet withdrawal. Because emotionally intelligent people recognize when emotional investment becomes wasteful. This is one reason emotionally mature people often appear calmer than others. It is not because life hurts them less. It is because they stopped giving emotional access to every trigger. They became selective with attention. Selective with reactions. Selective with emotional investment. This protects the nervous system enormously. Many emotionally reactive individuals secretly feel addicted to emotional intensity. Arguments stimulate them. Drama stimulates them. Conflict stimulates them. The nervous system becomes conditioned to emotional chaos. But emotionally intelligent people move differently. They understand. Constant emotional stimulation destroys clarity. So they create internal space intentionally. Space to think, reflect, regulate, breathe, without immediate reaction. This is rare in modern culture. Most people react instantly to everything. Emotionally intelligent people pause. That pause changes everything. Because emotional maturity is not measured by how loudly someone reacts. It is measured by how wisely they choose where their energy goes. This is why emotionally intelligent individuals often appear quieter over time. Not because they became emotionally disconnected. Because they finally learned. Attention is valuable. Peace is valuable. Nervous system energy is valuable. And not everyone deserves unlimited access to it. Eventually, emotionally intelligent people stop asking, "How do I make everyone understand me?" and start asking, "Is this interaction worthy of my emotional energy at all?" That question transforms communication completely. Because emotionally intelligent people understand perhaps the deepest truth of all: protecting your peace is not selfish. When the world constantly tries to consume your nervous system for attention. Chapter 3. The need to explain yourself often comes from seeking permission. Many people think they are explaining themselves for clarity. But psychologically, they are often seeking permission. Permission to make decisions, set boundaries, change, say no, disappoint people, choose themselves, exist authentically. The nervous system quietly asks, "Is it okay if I do this? Will I still be accepted? Will they still love me? Will I lose connection if they disapprove?" This is why some people cannot simply make decisions calmly. They feel compelled to justify every choice emotionally, even deeply personal choices. They explain why they are leaving, why they are tired, why they changed, why they need space, why they said no, why they set boundaries. Not always because explanation is necessary, but because the nervous system fears rejection. At the core of chronic explaining often lives unstable self-trust. The person unconsciously believes, "My choices are only safe if others approve of them." This creates emotional dependency on validation. And validation dependency creates psychological fragility. Because human beings cannot remain emotionally stable while outsourcing self-worth constantly. Every disagreement becomes destabilizing. Every criticism feels threatening. Every misunderstanding creates anxiety. The nervous system stays emotionally dependent on external reassurance. This often begins early in life. Children raised around conditional love frequently develop approval-based identities. Love may have depended on obedience, performance, emotional compliance, perfection, avoiding conflict, pleasing authority figures. The child learns to stay connected. "I must manage how others feel about me." So adulthood becomes emotional performance. The person constantly explains themselves in hopes of maintaining acceptance. This is exhausting psychologically. Because authentic living becomes impossible when every decision requires emotional permission from others. Many people never realize how deeply fear controls their communication. Fear of disappointing others, appearing selfish, being misunderstood, rejection, abandonment, criticism, conflict. So they over-explain to reduce discomfort. The nervous system believes, "If I explain enough, maybe they will approve." But emotionally intelligent people eventually recognize something powerful: needing constant approval destroys inner peace. Because approval is unstable, people change opinions constantly. Some will approve of you. Others will misunderstand you. Others will reject you no matter what you say. If identity depends entirely on external validation, the nervous system never rests. This realization transforms emotionally mature people. Slowly, they stop explaining choices that no longer require permission. Not from arrogance, from self-trust. This is one of the clearest signs of emotional growth: the ability to tolerate disapproval without collapsing internally. That ability changes communication profoundly. The person no longer feels emotionally compelled to justify every action. They understand. Adulthood means making decisions others may not fully understand. And that is okay. Many emotionally intelligent individuals eventually become quieter because they stop emotionally negotiating their right to exist authentically. They stop saying, "Please understand why I need this boundary," and begin saying internally, "I understand why I need this boundary." That is enough. This is emotional freedom, not emotional coldness. Freedom. The freedom to disappoint people without guilt consuming you, choose peace over approval, make decisions without endless explanation, trust your internal reality, stop emotionally auditioning for acceptance. Most people spend years trapped inside emotional permission seeking. Especially highly empathetic individuals. Because empathetic people naturally care about how their actions affect others. But without boundaries, empathy becomes self-betrayal. The person abandons personal truth to preserve external comfort. This creates resentment eventually. Because constantly explaining yourself often means constantly shrinking yourself psychologically, trying to make your truth easier for others to accept. Emotionally intelligent people stop doing this over time, not because they stop caring about others. Because they finally begin caring about themselves too. This is especially noticeable when emotionally mature people make difficult life changes. They often stop over-announcing personal growth, boundaries, healing goals, emotional shifts. Why? Because they no longer seek emotional permission to evolve. This confuses people who still rely heavily on external validation. Because insecure individuals often interpret silence as secrecy or arrogance. But emotionally intelligent people understand, not every internal transformation requires public explanation. Some growth happens privately, quietly, without emotional performance. This creates grounded confidence, not loud confidence. Quiet confidence. The kind that does not panic when misunderstood. The kind that does not crumble under criticism. The kind that no longer needs universal approval to feel internally stable. This is rare. Many adults still live psychologically trapped inside childhood approval patterns. Still trying to avoid disappointing authority figures, avoid emotional rejection, avoid conflict at all costs, maintain acceptance through over-explaining. But emotionally intelligent people eventually realize, no amount of explanation guarantees acceptance anyway. That truth can feel painful initially. Because the nervous system desperately wants control over perception. But it is also liberating. Because once someone accepts they cannot control everyone's reactions, they stop exhausting themselves trying. And something remarkable happens. The body relaxes. Communication simplifies. The person becomes more direct, more honest, less emotionally performative. Not because they became careless. Because self-worth no longer depends entirely on approval. This changes relationships dramatically too. Healthy relationships do not require endless emotional defense. Emotionally safe people can disagree without threatening identity. They respect boundaries without demanding long emotional justifications. They listen without forcing psychological self-defense constantly. This is why emotionally intelligent people become highly selective about who they explain themselves to. They notice who genuinely listens, respects boundaries, seeks understanding, honestly communicates safely. And they stop emotionally over-investing in people who only demand explanation to maintain control. This is emotional maturity. The understanding that you are allowed to make decisions others dislike, without abandoning yourself emotionally in the process. Eventually, emotionally intelligent people stop asking, how do I make everyone approve of my choices? And start asking, do I approve of the life I am building? That question changes everything. Because perhaps the deepest truth of all is this: the moment you stop seeking permission to be yourself, is often the moment your nervous system finally begins feeling free. Chapter 4. Not everyone is mentally or emotionally able to understand you. One of the most painful lessons emotionally intelligent people learn is this: not everyone has the emotional capacity to understand you. Not because you failed to explain clearly. Not because your feelings are invalid. But because people can only understand others through the limits of their own emotional awareness. This changes everything. Many people spend years exhausting themselves trying to explain their heart to emotionally unavailable individuals. Trying to make emotionally immature people understand boundaries, insecure people understand confidence, manipulative people understand honesty, emotionally disconnected people understand vulnerability. But emotional understanding requires emotional depth. And not everyone has developed that depth. This truth is difficult to accept. Because human beings naturally crave recognition. We want to feel seen, heard, understood, emotionally safe. So when misunderstanding happens repeatedly, the nervous system often reacts with urgency. The person explains harder, longer, more emotionally, believing, maybe if I use better words, they will finally understand me. But emotionally intelligent people eventually realize something heartbreaking. Some people are not misunderstanding you accidentally. They are interpreting you through unresolved pain, ego, insecurity, or emotional limitation. This realization creates emotional detachment. Healthy detachment. Not hatred. Not superiority. Understanding. Because emotionally mature people begin recognizing projection everywhere. Projection changes human perception profoundly. People often hear others through personal wounds, fears, insecurities, assumptions, past experiences, emotional biases. This means two people can hear the exact same sentence and emotionally interpret it completely differently. One hears honesty, another hears criticism. One hears boundaries, another hears rejection. One hears confidence, another hears arrogance. The words may remain identical, but emotional interpretation changes based on the listener's internal world. This is why emotionally intelligent people stop trying to control every perception. Because they realize perception is deeply personal, and exhausting yourself trying to manage everyone's interpretation destroys inner peace. Many emotionally immature individuals cannot separate disagreement from emotional threat, so they react defensively automatically. Not because you attack them. Because their nervous system feels unsafe around accountability, honesty, or emotional complexity. This creates impossible conversations. The emotionally intelligent person keeps trying, clarifying, softening tone, adding context, explaining intentions. Meanwhile, the other person keeps reacting emotionally through insecurity or defensiveness. The conversation becomes emotionally circular. Nothing resolves. Because the issue was never communication alone. It was emotional capacity. This realization is difficult for empathetic people especially. Empathetic individuals often believe, if I care enough, explain enough, stay patient enough, eventually they will understand. But emotional intelligence eventually teaches a painful boundary. Understanding cannot be forced. No matter how sincere you are, no matter how kind you are, no matter how carefully you explain yourself, some people are simply not emotionally ready to see you clearly. And continuing to emotionally chase understanding from unavailable people creates enormous psychological exhaustion. Many emotionally intelligent individuals eventually stop over-explaining because they finally understand this. Some people listen only to defend their ego, not to understand your humanity. That realization changes communication permanently. The person becomes calmer, more selective, more emotionally observant. They stop wasting emotional energy on conversations that only create more confusion and emotional depletion. This does not mean emotionally intelligent people become emotionally closed. It means they become discerning. They notice who listens safely, reflects honestly, seeks understanding, genuinely respects emotional nuance. And they stop emotionally investing in people committed to distortion. Because distorted perception is dangerous psychologically, especially for sensitive nervous systems. Many people lose themselves trying to explain reality to individuals determined to misunderstand them. They begin doubting memory, intentions, boundaries, emotions, identity itself. This often happens in emotionally manipulative relationships. The manipulative person keeps questioning tone, motives, character, emotional reactions, until the other person becomes trapped in endless self-defense. Emotionally intelligent people eventually recognize this dynamic. And once they do, they stop participating. Not because they gave up on communication. Because they finally realized. Some conversations are designed to keep you emotionally unstable. This awareness creates powerful emotional boundaries. The person no longer feels psychologically obligated to prove innocence endlessly. They understand. Emotionally healthy people do not require constant emotional dissection of your intentions. Mature individuals ask questions honestly. Listen openly. Communicate directly. They do not trap others inside endless emotional trials. Another important truth. Some people misunderstand you because understanding you would require them to confront themselves. This is deeply uncomfortable psychologically. For example, your boundaries may expose their lack of boundaries, your healing may expose their emotional avoidance, your confidence may trigger their insecurity, your honesty may threaten their self-image, so misunderstanding becomes psychological self-protection. The person distorts you to preserve internal comfort. Emotionally intelligent individuals eventually stop taking this personally. Because they understand. How people interpret you often reveals more about their internal world than your actual character. This realization creates emotional freedom. Not emotional numbness. Freedom. The freedom to stop shrinking yourself trying to fit inside limited perception. The freedom to stop emotionally chasing validation from emotionally unavailable people. The freedom to exist without constant psychological self-defense. This changes the nervous system profoundly. The body relaxes. Communication becomes simpler. The person stops emotionally performing for understanding constantly. And instead of asking, "How do I make them finally understand me?" they begin asking, "Why am I exhausting myself trying to be understood by someone unwilling to listen honestly?" That question changes everything. Because emotionally intelligent people eventually realize perhaps the deepest truth of all. Some people will never understand you. Not because your truth is unclear, but because their emotional limitations prevent them from seeing beyond themselves. Chapter 5. Silence reveals emotional power. Most people misunderstand silence. They think silence means weakness, avoidance, insecurity, emotional distance, lack of confidence. But emotionally intelligent people understand something deeper. Silence is often emotional regulation in its highest form. Because emotionally reactive people feel compelled to respond immediately. To defend, correct, prove, explain, win. The nervous system becomes activated and demands emotional discharge instantly. But emotionally grounded people develop a different ability. The ability to remain internally stable without reacting impulsively. That ability is power. Real power. Not domination over others. Control over self. Many people speak not because communication is necessary, but because emotional discomfort feels unbearable. Silence forces people to sit with uncertainty. And insecure nervous systems struggle deeply with uncertainty. They want immediate reassurance, immediate clarity, immediate resolution, immediate emotional control, so they keep talking, explaining, defending, justifying, overcorrecting, trying to reduce internal anxiety. But emotionally intelligent people eventually realize, constant reaction weakens emotional clarity. Because strong emotions distort communication. Anger distorts, fear distorts, shame distorts, defensiveness distorts. The nervous system becomes focused on protection rather than truth. This is why emotionally reactive conversations often spiral into chaos quickly. Nobody is truly listening. Both people are simply trying to protect identity emotionally. But silence interrupts this cycle. Silence creates space. Space to regulate emotions, observe clearly, think intentionally, avoid impulsive damage, protect inner peace. This is why emotionally intelligent people often pause before responding. Not because they are emotionally disconnected. Because they understand the nervous system needs regulation before communication becomes healthy. This pause changes everything. Most emotionally immature people react from activation. Emotionally intelligent people respond from awareness. That difference is enormous psychologically. Reactive people often say things they regret. Not because they are evil. Because emotional flooding temporarily overrides self-awareness. The nervous system enters defensive survival mode. And survival mode prioritizes protection, not wisdom. This is why emotionally intelligent people value silence during emotionally charged moments. They understand. Not every emotion deserves immediate expression. This does not mean suppression. Suppression ignores emotion. Healthy silence observes emotion without becoming controlled by it. There is a major difference. Suppressed people disconnect from feelings entirely. Emotionally intelligent people feel deeply, but choose carefully when and how emotions are expressed. This creates calm energy. Grounded energy. The kind of presence that unsettles emotionally manipulative people. Because manipulators rely heavily on emotional reactions. They provoke intentionally. Push buttons. Create confusion. Seek emotional access. Why? Because reactive people are easier to control. An emotionally activated nervous system loses clarity quickly. But silence disrupts manipulation. The manipulative person expects defensiveness. Emotional chasing over explaining panic. Emotional collapse. Instead, emotionally intelligent people often respond with calm detachment, not coldness. Regulation. And this changes the entire emotional dynamic. Because silence forces accountability onto the other person too. Without emotional chaos to distract the conversation, truth becomes harder to avoid. This is why emotionally grounded individuals rarely feel the need to emotionally overpower others. They do not need volume to create presence. Their stability speaks loudly already. Many people fear silence because silence exposes internal discomfort. Without constant speaking, distraction disappears. The nervous system must finally confront insecurity, fear, shame, unresolved emotion. This is uncomfortable for emotionally reactive individuals. So they fill silence compulsively. Talking constantly, explaining constantly, defending constantly. But emotionally intelligent people become comfortable with pauses. Comfortable with not immediately controlling perception. Comfortable with allowing misunderstanding temporarily. This comfort signals deep internal stability. Because emotionally secure people understand, silence does not automatically threaten identity. They no longer panic every time someone misunderstands them. No longer feel psychologically required to defend every opinion. No longer collapse emotionally under external judgment. This creates quiet confidence. Not performative confidence, quiet confidence. The kind that does not need constant emotional proof. Another reason silence reveals power. It protects dignity. Emotionally reactive conversations often push people into emotional overexposure. Saying too much, explaining too much, revealing vulnerabilities to unsafe people, then regretting it later. Emotionally intelligent individuals learn restraint. They understand. Not everyone deserves full emotional access. This awareness protects the nervous system enormously. Especially in modern culture where emotional impulsivity is often rewarded publicly. People are encouraged to react instantly, expose everything, defend publicly, emotionally perform constantly, but emotionally intelligent people move differently. They understand. Peace often requires restraint, not repression. Restraint. The ability to remain connected to emotion without becoming controlled by it publicly. This is emotional maturity. Many people mistake emotional intensity for authenticity. But authenticity without regulation can become destruction. Healthy people express truth responsibly, not impulsively. This is why emotionally intelligent people often appear calm during conflict. Not because they feel nothing. Because they trained themselves not to let emotion completely hijack the nervous system. This creates psychological strength. The ability to remain centered while others lose control emotionally. And perhaps the deepest truth of all is this. Silence becomes powerful the moment your nervous system no longer feels obligated to defend your worth in every conversation. Chapter 6. Highly self-aware people stop arguing with misperception. There comes a moment in emotional maturity when a person realizes something deeply freeing. People will see you through the lens of who they are, not only who you are. That realization changes communication forever. Because most people spend years trying to correct perception, trying to make everyone understand intentions, see the full story, recognize their heart, accurately interpret them fairly. But emotionally intelligent people eventually understand something painful. Some people are committed to misunderstanding you because the misunderstanding benefits them emotionally. This is difficult to accept, especially for empathetic individuals. Because empathetic people naturally believe clarity creates connection. They think, if I explain carefully enough, eventually they will understand. But self-aware people eventually recognize, not every misunderstanding is accidental. Sometimes people distort you to protect their ego, avoid accountability, preserve control, maintain emotional superiority, justify their own behavior. This is why endless self-defense becomes emotionally pointless after a while. Because the issue is no longer communication. The issue is perception filtered through emotional bias. Highly self-aware people stop arguing with distorted perception constantly because they understand something crucial. You cannot force emotional honesty onto someone invested in misunderstanding you. That truth creates enormous emotional freedom. Not because it feels good initially, but because it ends the exhausting cycle of emotional chasing. Many people remain trapped in this cycle for years, trying to prove they are good, prove they are misunderstood, prove their intentions, prove their worth, prove they are not selfish, prove they are not the villain. The nervous system becomes trapped inside identity defense, constantly scanning for judgment, constantly correcting narratives, constantly explaining humanity. This is exhausting psychologically, because no human being can regulate every opinion surrounding them. And emotionally intelligent people eventually stop trying. Not from defeat, from awareness. They realize, people who genuinely care to understand you will listen honestly. People committed to distortion will distort no matter how much truth you offer. That distinction matters deeply. Self-aware individuals learn to recognize the difference quickly. They observe. Is this person curious or defensive? Are they listening or preparing arguments? Do they seek truth or emotional control? Are they misunderstanding accidentally or strategically? These observations protect emotional energy enormously. Because emotionally intelligent people understand, not every perception deserves emotional correction. This does not mean they stop caring about integrity. Quite the opposite. Highly self-aware people care deeply about truth. But they stop emotionally collapsing every time someone creates an inaccurate story about them. Why? Because identity no longer depends entirely on external interpretation. This is emotional stability. The ability to remain internally grounded even while being misunderstood externally. Most people never fully develop this skill. They remain psychologically dependent on public perception. So criticism destroys them. Misunderstanding destabilizes them. Rejection consumes them. The nervous system constantly seeks external emotional confirmation. But highly self-aware people gradually detach from this dependency. Not because they become emotionless. Because they finally understand. Peace becomes impossible when your nervous system depends on universal approval. This realization changes relationships dramatically. Self-aware individuals stop chasing people who constantly misinterpret them, defending boundaries repeatedly, over-explaining obvious truths, emotionally performing innocence instead. They communicate clearly once. Then observe behavior. If misunderstanding continues despite honesty and clarity, they emotionally disengage. Because they recognize something many people never learn. Some people do not want clarity. They want emotional leverage. This is especially true in manipulative relationships. Manipulative individuals often intentionally distort others because confusion creates control. The more someone defends themselves emotionally, the more emotionally unstable they become. Highly self-aware people eventually stop participating in these dynamics. Not because they stop valuing connection. Because they stop sacrificing mental peace trying to fix distorted perception endlessly. This creates a quieter life internally. A calmer nervous system. The person no longer wakes up obsessed with who misunderstood them, who judged them unfairly, who created false narratives, who failed to recognize their intentions. They understand something liberating. Your truth does not disappear simply because someone refuses to see it. That sentence changes everything emotionally. Because insecure people constantly seek mirrors. They need others to reflect worth back to them continuously. But emotionally intelligent people slowly develop internal grounding. They know who they are privately. And private self-awareness becomes stronger than public misunderstanding. This is rare. Especially in a culture obsessed with image, validation, and perception management. Most people spend enormous psychological energy trying to appear correct publicly. Highly self-aware people focus instead on being internally aligned. Because they understand. Perception is unstable, character is deeper. This does not mean they never clarify misunderstandings. Healthy communication still matters. But they stop over-functioning emotionally trying to force understanding from resistant people. That effort only destroys peace. Many emotionally intelligent individuals become quieter over time because they realize explaining yourself repeatedly to people committed to distortion is a form of self-abandonment. That realization creates boundaries. Powerful boundaries. The kind that says, I know my intentions. I communicated honestly. I no longer need to emotionally fight for permission to exist peacefully. This is not arrogance. It is self-trust. And self-trust transforms communication completely. The nervous system relaxes. The body stops preparing for emotional trial constantly. The person no longer fears every misunderstanding as identity collapse. They allow people to misunderstand, disagree, project, judge, without feeling psychologically obligated to correct every false perception. This creates emotional freedom few people ever experience. Because perhaps the deepest truth of all is this: highly self-aware people stop arguing with every misunderstanding. When they finally realize their inner peace is more valuable than controlling public perception. Chapter 7. Some people only want a reaction, not understanding. Not every conversation is truly about communication. Some conversations are about control, attention, power, emotional access. This is one of the most important things emotionally intelligent people eventually learn. Some people are not trying to understand you. They are trying to provoke you. At first, this realization feels painful. Because emotionally healthy individuals usually assume sincerity. They assume. If someone asks questions, they want clarity. If someone argues, they want resolution. If someone pushes emotionally, they want honesty. But emotionally manipulative people often operate differently. For them, emotional reactions become psychological fuel. The goal is not mutual understanding. The goal is emotional activation. Why? Because emotionally reactive people are easier to influence, destabilize, and control. This is why certain individuals continuously provoke arguments, twist words, misinterpret, intentionally repeat accusations, ignore explanations, create emotional confusion, not because communication failed. Because emotional chaos benefits them psychologically. The nervous system of emotionally intelligent people eventually recognizes this pattern. And once recognized, everything changes. The person stops asking, how do I make them understand? And starts asking, why do they keep trying to emotionally destabilize me? That question creates clarity. Many emotionally manipulative individuals unconsciously fear emotionally grounded people. Why? Because emotionally grounded people are difficult to control. They think before reacting, regulate emotions carefully, maintain boundaries, avoid emotional impulsivity, do not collapse under pressure easily. This frustrates manipulative personalities deeply. Because manipulators depend heavily on emotional access. They want defensiveness over explaining, panic, emotional chasing, guilt, emotional vulnerability under pressure. These reactions create leverage. Once someone becomes emotionally reactive, clarity decreases. The nervous system enters survival mode. And survival mode weakens discernment. This is why emotionally intelligent people protect calmness intentionally. Calmness preserves perception. The moment emotional flooding begins, critical thinking weakens dramatically. Manipulative people know this intuitively, even if unconsciously. So they create emotionally circular conversations. No matter how clearly you explain, the misunderstanding continues. No matter how calmly you communicate, new accusations appear. No matter how much empathy you offer, the emotional tension remains unresolved. Why? Because the goal was never clarity. The goal was continued emotional engagement. This is emotionally exhausting for empathetic people especially. Because empathetic individuals keep believing, if I just explain differently, maybe peace will finally happen. But emotionally intelligent people eventually recognize something difficult. Some people do not want peace. They want emotional dominance. This realization changes communication permanently. The person stops emotionally rewarding manipulative behavior with endless engagement. They disengage. Quietly. Without dramatic explanation. Because emotionally mature people understand, attention is reinforcement. Every emotional reaction feeds the dynamic further. This is why some toxic individuals become more intense when ignored calmly. Not because silence is wrong. Because emotional access is being removed. And emotionally dependent people often react strongly when they lose control over someone's nervous system. This happens frequently in toxic relationships, emotionally abusive families, manipulative friendships, online arguments, workplace dynamics. The emotionally manipulative person keeps pulling for reaction constantly. And the emotionally exhausted person keeps defending themselves endlessly. Until eventually, emotionally intelligent people realize, not responding emotionally is sometimes the healthiest response possible. This is not emotional suppression. It is strategic emotional regulation. A regulated nervous system understands, not every emotional invitation deserves acceptance. This distinction protects peace enormously. Many people destroy mental health by engaging emotionally with every provocation, every insult, every accusation, every misunderstanding. The nervous system never rests. Constant emotional defense becomes identity. But emotionally intelligent people eventually stop participating in unnecessary psychological battles. They understand. Emotionally chaotic people often interpret your calmness as loss of control. And that is exactly why calmness matters. Silence disrupts emotional manipulation. Because manipulation requires participation. Without reaction, many unhealthy dynamics lose power. This does not mean emotionally intelligent people never speak up. Healthy communication still matters. Boundaries still matter. Truth still matters. But they stop confusing emotional accessibility with emotional obligation. They no longer believe they must emotionally engage every person demanding reaction. This changes relationships profoundly. The emotionally intelligent person becomes less reactive, more observant, harder to emotionally provoke, calmer under pressure, less emotionally available for manipulation. This often upsets emotionally immature individuals initially. Because reactive dynamics no longer function the same way. The emotionally intelligent person no longer over-defends, over-explains, emotionally chases, collapses into guilt, instantly fights endlessly for understanding. Instead, they recognize emotional bait quickly. And they refuse to consume it. This is real emotional power. Not aggression. Not dominance. Regulation. The ability to protect your nervous system from people who feed on emotional chaos. Many people never learn this. They spend years trapped inside emotional games disguised as communication. Arguing endlessly. Explaining endlessly. Defending endlessly. Meanwhile, their nervous system deteriorates slowly from constant activation. Emotionally intelligent people eventually choose something different. Peace. Not because they are weak. Because they understand. Some people become emotionally stronger every time you react. and emotionally powerless every time you remain grounded. That awareness changes everything. Because perhaps the deepest truth of all is this: some people never wanted understanding from you in the first place. They only wanted access to your emotional reactions. Chapter 8. Emotionally intelligent people speak clearly, then let go. Emotionally intelligent people do not avoid communication. They simply stop emotionally chasing outcomes they cannot control. This is a major difference. Many people believe emotional maturity means staying silent all the time. It does not. Emotionally intelligent individuals still communicate honestly, express boundaries, explain intentions when necessary, speak directly, address problems calmly but after communicating clearly. They let go. They do not obsess endlessly afterward. Do not emotionally spiral trying to control interpretation. Do not repeatedly defend themselves hoping for perfect understanding. This ability creates enormous psychological peace. Because emotionally mature people eventually understand, communication is your responsibility. Another person's interpretation is not fully within your control. That realization changes everything. Most emotionally exhausted people are not tired from speaking honestly. They are tired from trying to manage everyone's emotional response afterward. The nervous system keeps asking, did they understand me? Did I upset them? Should I explain more? Should I send another message? What if they think I'm selfish? What if they misunderstood my tone? This mental loop becomes exhausting. Because the person is no longer communicating. They are emotionally managing perception obsessively. Emotionally intelligent people slowly stop doing this. Not because they stop caring. Because they understand. Endless explanation often weakens clarity instead of strengthening it. Why? Because repetition frequently signals emotional insecurity. The more someone desperately tries to convince others, the more unstable the communication begins feeling psychologically. Emotionally mature individuals recognize this. So they communicate once with honesty and calmness. Then they allow space. This is difficult initially for anxious nervous systems, especially for people conditioned to fear misunderstanding. The body feels intense discomfort after difficult conversations. The nervous system wants immediate reassurance, immediate resolution, immediate emotional safety. So the person feels tempted to send another paragraph, clarify again, soften the boundary, over apologize, emotionally chase reassurance. But emotionally intelligent people learn to tolerate this discomfort without abandoning themselves. This is emotional regulation. The ability to remain grounded even while uncertainty exists. Most people cannot do this. They try to eliminate uncertainty immediately through overcommunication. But emotionally mature people understand, some discomfort is necessary for self-respect. Especially when setting boundaries. Boundaries become weak the moment they require endless emotional negotiation. This is why emotionally intelligent people speak clearly, then step back. They trust their words, their intentions, their internal truth, without emotionally collapsing if someone reacts negatively. This creates calm communication, stable communication, the kind that does not feel emotionally desperate underneath. Many emotionally reactive people communicate from fear. Fear of abandonment, rejection, conflict, misunderstanding, losing connection, so they overtalk, over-explain, over-defend, over-justify, trying to emotionally secure the interaction. But emotionally intelligent people eventually realize, if connection depends entirely on constant self-defense, the connection is already emotionally unsafe. That realization changes relationship standards profoundly. The person stops emotionally chasing people who require endless explanation to offer basic understanding. This does not mean emotionally intelligent people expect perfection. Healthy misunderstandings happen naturally. Healthy communication includes clarification sometimes. But mature people recognize when explanation becomes emotional self-erasure. When the person is no longer communicating honestly, but performing emotionally for acceptance. That performance destroys authenticity slowly. Emotionally intelligent individuals stop participating in it. They become more direct over time. More concise. Not rude. Grounded. Because grounded people do not need endless words to validate their reality internally. Another important truth. Emotionally intelligent people allow others to feel their reactions without rushing to rescue them emotionally. This is difficult for highly empathetic individuals. Because empathetic people often feel responsible for everyone's emotional state. So after setting a boundary, they panic if someone becomes upset. The nervous system says, fix it immediately, explain more, make them comfortable again. But emotionally mature people understand. Other people are allowed to feel disappointment without you abandoning your truth. That sentence changes everything psychologically. Because many people were conditioned to believe, if someone is upset with me, I must immediately repair their emotions. This creates chronic self-betrayal. The person keeps sacrificing honesty to avoid external discomfort. But emotionally intelligent people eventually stop doing this. Not because they become selfish. Because they finally understand. Protecting your peace sometimes disappoints people who benefited from your lack of boundaries. This realization creates stronger nervous system stability. The body no longer panics every time disapproval appears. The person becomes emotionally resilient. Able to communicate clearly, tolerate misunderstanding, survive disappointment, maintain boundaries, calmly allow emotional space without collapsing into over-explanation. This is rare. Most people still believe communication means convincing. But emotionally intelligent people understand. Communication is expression, not control. You can communicate honestly, and still be misunderstood. You can explain clearly, and still be judged unfairly. You can speak kindly, and still trigger insecurity in others. This is part of human reality. Emotionally mature individuals stop fighting this truth constantly. And because of that, they experience more peace internally. They stop exhausting themselves trying to control every emotional outcome. Instead, they focus on honesty, clarity, regulation, integrity. Then they release attachment to the rest. This creates emotional freedom, not emotional indifference. Freedom. The freedom to express yourself honestly, stop emotionally chasing validation, allow misunderstanding without panic, trust your intentions privately, protect your nervous system from obsessive overthinking. Eventually, emotionally intelligent people understand perhaps the deepest truth of all. Your responsibility is to communicate truthfully and respectfully. It is not your responsibility to emotionally force everyone else to receive it perfectly. Chapter 9. Your nervous system changes when you stop defending yourself constantly. Most people do not realize how exhausting constant self-defense becomes. Not just mentally. Physically. The nervous system was never designed to remain in continuous emotional protection mode. Yet many people live this way for years. Constantly. Explaining, defending, clarifying, proving. Correcting perception, managing reactions, preparing for misunderstanding. The body absorbs all of it. Every emotionally charged interaction activates stress responses internally. Heart rate changes, muscles tighten, thoughts accelerate, breathing shifts, sleep quality suffers. The nervous system stays hyper alert, always anticipating emotional danger. This becomes chronic for people who spent years feeling psychologically unsafe, especially those raised in environments where criticism was constant. Emotional unpredictability existed, mistakes led to shame, intentions were questioned repeatedly, boundaries were punished, self-expression felt dangerous. The body adapts to survival. Hypervigilance becomes normal. The person begins living as though emotional attack could happen at any moment, even in safe environments later in life. This is why many people feel exhausted after ordinary conversations. Their nervous system interprets communication as emotional risk automatically. So every interaction becomes emotionally loaded. The person unconsciously prepares to defend motives, Justify feelings, avoid rejection, prevent conflict, manage perception. This constant internal preparation drains enormous psychological energy. Eventually, the body becomes tired. Deeply tired. Not because life itself is always difficult. Because the nervous system never fully rests. Emotionally intelligent people eventually recognize this pattern. And slowly, they stop participating in endless self-defense. At first, this feels terrifying. Because the nervous system fears, if I stop defending myself, maybe people will misunderstand me. Maybe they will dislike me. Maybe I will lose connection. But over time, something surprising happens. The body begins relaxing. Not immediately. Gradually. The nervous system realizes, I survived not explaining everything. I survived someone misunderstanding me. I survived disapproval. This realization changes emotional functioning profoundly. Because many anxious people never learned that misunderstanding is survivable. They experience misunderstanding as identity threat. So the body reacts intensely. But emotionally intelligent individuals slowly teach themselves something different. I do not need universal approval to remain emotionally safe. That lesson creates nervous system freedom. The body stops preparing for emotional war constantly. Conversations feel lighter. Silence feels less threatening. Boundaries feel less guilt-inducing. The mind becomes quieter. This is one reason emotionally intelligent people often become calmer with age. Not because life stops hurting them. Because they stop emotionally fighting every perception constantly. The nervous system conserves energy instead of spending it on endless emotional defense. This changes physical health too. Chronic emotional hypervigilance affects sleep, digestion, concentration, immune function, anxiety levels, emotional regulation. The body keeps producing stress responses repeatedly. And over time, constant emotional activation becomes exhaustion. Many people call this burnout. But often it is nervous system depletion from years of emotional survival mode. Emotionally intelligent people begin healing when they realize, peace is impossible while constantly preparing to defend your existence psychologically. That sentence changes everything. Because many people unconsciously feel they must earn acceptance continuously. Earn understanding. Earn emotional safety. Earn the right to boundaries. So the nervous system never stops performing. But emotionally mature individuals gradually stop emotionally auditioning for worthiness. They understand. Healthy people do not require constant proof of your humanity. This creates profound emotional relief. The person stops rehearsing conversations, obsessively replaying misunderstandings, constantly panicking over judgment, explaining every personal choice, emotionally chasing validation after conflict, and because these behaviors decrease, the nervous system finally begins experiencing rest. Real rest. Not temporary distraction. Internal rest. The kind where the body no longer feels psychologically hunted by perception. This creates confidence naturally. Not performative confidence. Nervous system confidence. The quiet stability that develops when someone no longer feels emotionally obligated to defend every aspect of themselves constantly. This confidence feels different. Calmer. Softer. More grounded. Because it is built on self-trust instead of external validation. Another important change happens too. Emotionally intelligent people become more emotionally present. Why? Because self-defense consumes attention. When the nervous system constantly monitors for judgment, genuine presence disappears. The person becomes trapped inside self-monitoring. Watching. Tone. Facial expressions, reactions, opinions, emotional shifts. Trying to maintain emotional safety constantly. But once defensive hypervigilance decreases, presence returns. The person begins listening more deeply, thinking more clearly, responding more intentionally, feeling calmer, socially enjoying relationships more naturally. Because the nervous system is no longer trapped inside constant emotional protection. This is healing. Not perfection. Healing. Many people think emotional intelligence is only about communication skills. But true emotional intelligence includes nervous system awareness. The understanding that how you communicate affects your body profoundly. This is why emotionally mature people protect peace intentionally. Not because they dislike people. Because they understand the biological cost of constant emotional conflict. They stop emotionally engaging with every accusation, misunderstanding, or projection because they recognize the nervous system deserves protection too. This creates a quieter internal life. A life with less emotional panic, less overthinking, less compulsive explaining, less identity defense, less fear of perception. And eventually, the person experiences something many people never fully feel: internal safety. The realization that even if someone misunderstands me, I will still be okay. That sentence heals the nervous system deeply. Because perhaps the deepest truth of all is this: the moment you stop constantly defending yourself emotionally, your nervous system finally gets a chance to rest. Chapter 10. Boundaries often sound like silence. Many people think boundaries are long explanations. They are not. Real boundaries are decisions. And emotionally intelligent people eventually understand something powerful. The healthiest boundaries often require fewer words, not more. This surprises people. Especially those raised to believe they must justify every need emotionally. Many individuals think boundaries must be fully defended, endlessly explained, emotionally negotiated, approved by others, otherwise they feel guilty. So instead of setting boundaries clearly, they over-explain them repeatedly, trying to make everyone comfortable first. But emotionally intelligent people slowly realize a boundary that requires endless permission is no longer a boundary. It becomes emotional negotiation. This is why mature people often become quieter over time. Not because they lost emotional depth. Because they stopped explaining decisions that already feel clear internally. They understand. No is a complete sentence emotionally, not a debate invitation. This is difficult for people with anxious or trauma-conditioned nervous systems. Especially those who grew up around guilt, manipulation, emotional unpredictability, controlling relationships, conditional love, punishment for independence. These environments teach the nervous system: if I disappoint people, I become unsafe. So adulthood boundaries become terrifying. The person feels intense anxiety saying, "No. I need space that hurts me. I disagree. I cannot do this anymore." And after finally expressing the boundary, the nervous system panics. The person starts over-explaining, apologizing excessively, softening the truth, emotionally rescuing others, questioning themselves, trying to reduce discomfort immediately. But emotionally intelligent people learn something life-changing. Discomfort does not automatically mean the boundary is wrong. That sentence heals people deeply. Because many individuals confuse guilt with wrongdoing. But guilt often appears simply because the nervous system is adjusting to self-protection. Especially if someone spent years prioritizing others over themselves emotionally. At first, boundaries feel unnatural. Selfish even. Why? Because survival conditioning taught the person keeping others comfortable matters more than protecting yourself. Emotionally intelligent people eventually unlearn this. Slowly. Painfully sometimes. But eventually they realize boundaries are not cruelty. They are nervous system protection. This changes communication completely. The person stops emotionally over-explaining every decision. Not because they stop caring. Because they finally understand. Emotionally healthy people respect clear boundaries without requiring emotional collapse from you first. This distinction matters deeply. Manipulative people often demand endless explanation because explanation creates emotional access. The longer the conversation continues, the more opportunities exist for guilt, pressure, confusion, emotional control, boundary erosion. Emotionally intelligent people recognize this pattern. And instead of endlessly defending their needs, They simplify communication, not aggressively, calmly, directly. For example, instead of saying, "I'm so sorry, I just feel overwhelmed lately and I hope you understand and I don't want you upset," they may simply say, "I need some space right now." Clear, grounded, self-respecting. This kind of communication often shocks emotionally reactive people. Why? Because emotionally reactive individuals are used to emotional negotiation, used to convincing others to abandon boundaries through pressure. But emotionally intelligent people stop participating in these dynamics. They understand. Boundaries lose strength when over-explained repeatedly. This is why silence becomes part of emotional maturity. Not avoidance silence. Boundary silence. The silence that says, "I already communicated clearly. I will not endlessly defend my right to peace." That silence is powerful. Especially for people who spent years emotionally over-accessible. Many emotionally intelligent individuals eventually communicate more through behavior than explanation. Why? Because behavior reveals truth more clearly than endless words. Healthy people notice consistency. They respect actions. Emotionally manipulative individuals, however, often ignore actions and demand emotional over-engagement constantly. This is why mature people stop trying to convince everyone to respect boundaries. Instead, they observe responses carefully. Because reactions to boundaries reveal character quickly, emotionally healthy people may feel disappointed sometimes, but they still respect limits. Emotionally unhealthy people often respond with guilt, anger, manipulation, pressure, silent punishment, emotional escalation. This information matters. Because emotionally intelligent people eventually realize, boundaries do not ruin healthy relationships. They reveal unhealthy ones. That realization changes everything. The person stops feeling guilty for protecting emotional space, stops over-explaining every need, stops emotionally sacrificing peace for approval, and gradually, the nervous system becomes stronger, calmer, more stable. Because self-protection no longer feels psychologically forbidden. Another important truth. Emotionally intelligent people understand that not everyone deserves unlimited emotional access. This is difficult for highly empathetic individuals initially. Because empathetic people often equate openness with kindness. But openness without boundaries creates emotional exhaustion. The nervous system becomes overwhelmed from constant emotional exposure. Mature people learn balance. They remain compassionate, kind, emotionally aware while still protecting inner peace. This creates healthier relationships too. Because relationships without boundaries eventually become emotionally resentful. One person overgives, over-explains, over-accommodates, until exhaustion appears. Boundaries prevent this. They create sustainability, self-respect, emotional honesty. And emotionally intelligent people no longer apologize for needing these things. Not because they became hard. Because they finally realized, protecting your nervous system is not selfish. It is necessary. Eventually, emotionally intelligent people stop asking, "How do I make everyone comfortable with my boundaries?" and begin asking, "Why was I taught to abandon myself just to avoid discomfort?" That question creates deep emotional awakening. Because perhaps the deepest truth of all is this: boundaries often sound like silence. Because emotionally intelligent people stop explaining themselves once they realize peace does not require permission. Chapter 11. Real confidence is quiet. Most people misunderstand confidence. They think confidence is loud, dominant, attention-seeking, constantly proving itself. But real confidence rarely behaves this way. Because emotionally intelligent people eventually understand, the need to constantly prove yourself usually comes from insecurity, not strength. Truly confident people do not spend their lives emotionally performing certainty. They do not desperately chase validation from every room. Do not panic when misunderstood. do not collapse emotionally under disagreement. Why? Because their nervous system no longer depends entirely on external approval for stability. This creates quietness, not weakness. Inner grounding. Many people confuse attention with confidence. But attention-seeking often hides emotional fragility underneath. The person constantly needs reassurance, recognition, admiration, agreement, validation. Without these things, the nervous system becomes unstable. So they perform constantly, explaining excessively, defending excessively, proving excessively, trying to secure worth externally. But emotionally intelligent people slowly detach from this cycle. Not because they stop valuing connection. Because they finally understand. Self-worth built entirely on external reaction is emotionally unstable. This realization changes behavior profoundly. The person stops trying to win every room. Stops trying to control every opinion. Stops trying to appear perfect constantly. And because of this, they become calmer, more authentic, more emotionally free. Real confidence does not need constant emotional advertisement. It exists quietly. In the way someone speaks calmly, sets boundaries directly, tolerates misunderstanding, handles criticism without collapse, remains emotionally regulated under pressure. This kind of confidence feels different. Grounded. Stable. Safe. Because it comes from internal trust instead of external performance. Emotionally intelligent people often become quieter as confidence increases. This confuses many people, especially in a world where loudness is rewarded publicly. Modern culture constantly encourages self-promotion, emotional performance, public validation, endless visibility, attention, competition, so silence is often misunderstood. People assume quiet means insecure, restraint means weakness, calmness means lack of confidence, but emotionally mature individuals understand. Secure people rarely feel the need to constantly announce their value. They simply live it. This is why emotionally intelligent people stop over-explaining themselves eventually. Because confidence reduces the need for emotional persuasion. The person no longer feels psychologically desperate to make everyone agree. They trust themselves privately. This creates emotional steadiness, not arrogance. Arrogance actually comes from fragile ego. Arrogant people constantly need superiority to stabilize identity. Real confidence does not require domination. It remains calm even without control. This is rare. Most people are deeply uncomfortable without validation. The nervous system craves reassurance constantly. Especially for individuals raised around conditional approval. Children who received love mainly through achievement, obedience, performance, perfection, people-pleasing, often grow into adults emotionally addicted to external validation. Their confidence becomes performance-based. So adulthood feels like endless auditioning, trying to appear smart enough, attractive enough, successful enough, likable enough, emotionally acceptable enough. This becomes exhausting psychologically. Because no amount of external approval permanently heals internal insecurity. Emotionally intelligent people eventually realize this. And slowly, they stop building identity around public perception. This does not happen instantly. The nervous system resists initially. Why? Because validation once felt emotionally necessary for survival. But healing changes this. The person gradually learns, I can survive disapproval. I can survive misunderstanding. I can survive not being liked by everyone. These realizations create real emotional freedom. The body relaxes. Communication simplifies. The person becomes less emotionally performative, more genuine. This is why truly confident people often appear emotionally unbothered. Not because they feel nothing. Because they stopped giving every opinion access to their nervous system. That boundary protects peace enormously. Emotionally intelligent individuals understand. Not every judgment deserves emotional reaction. Some people will dislike you simply because you set boundaries. You changed. You stopped people pleasing, you became emotionally healthier, your confidence exposes their insecurity. Mature people stop taking this personally. They understand. Being misunderstood is sometimes the cost of authenticity. This creates powerful emotional stability. The person no longer abandons themselves to preserve external approval constantly. Instead, they prioritize alignment. Living in a way that feels internally honest, even if not universally accepted. This is the foundation of quiet confidence, not superiority. Self-trust. And self-trust changes relationships too. Confident people stop over-chasing connection, over-explaining boundaries, emotionally begging for understanding, performing constantly for acceptance. They communicate honestly, then allow others to respond however they choose. This creates healthier emotional dynamics. Because relationships built on performance eventually become exhausting. But relationships built on authenticity create peace. Another important truth: quiet confidence often looks emotionally simple. The person no longer seeks constant attention, reacts impulsively, argues endlessly, over-defends identity, performs emotional intensity unnecessarily. They become more emotionally regulated, more present, more selective with energy. Because they understand, peace matters more than public performance. This is emotional maturity, not perfection. The understanding that you do not need to constantly prove your worth to deserve respect, love, or space in the world. Eventually, emotionally intelligent people stop asking, "How do I make everyone see my value?" and begin asking, "Why did I ever believe my value depended on being seen correctly by everyone?" That question changes identity completely. Because perhaps the deepest truth of all is this: real confidence becomes quiet. The moment your nervous system no longer depends on constant external validation to feel worthy. Conclusion: you stop explaining yourself when you finally trust yourself. For most of your life, you may have believed explanation creates safety. If you explained enough, maybe people would stop misunderstanding you. Maybe conflict would disappear. Maybe rejection could be avoided. Maybe people would finally see your heart clearly. So you kept trying. Explaining. Intentions, boundaries, emotions, decisions, silence, needs, pain. Again and again. Sometimes even before anyone questioned you. Because the nervous system learned something early. If people misunderstand me, I become emotionally unsafe. This belief shaped communication deeply. You became hyper-aware of tone, reactions, perception, emotional shifts, social approval. Trying constantly to maintain emotional stability through explanation. But over time, this becomes exhausting. Not because communication is bad. Because endless self-defense slowly disconnects people from themselves. The person stops asking, "What feels true for me?" and starts asking, "How do I make everyone comfortable with my truth?" That shift creates emotional suffering. Because human beings cannot remain internally peaceful while constantly performing for external acceptance. Eventually, emotionally intelligent people reach emotional exhaustion. Not dramatic exhaustion. Quiet exhaustion. The exhaustion of over-explaining, over-defending, over-apologizing, over-performing, over-managing perception. And strangely, this exhaustion often becomes the beginning of healing. Because finally, the person realizes, no amount of explanation guarantees understanding anyway. That realization feels painful at first, but also liberating. Because once you understand, you cannot fully control how others perceive you. You stop sacrificing your nervous system trying. This changes communication completely. You begin speaking differently, calmer, simpler, more honestly. Not because you stopped caring. Because you stopped emotionally chasing universal validation. This is emotional maturity. The understanding that your worth does not disappear when someone misunderstands you. That sentence heals something deep inside people, especially those raised around criticism, emotional unpredictability, manipulation. Invalidation conditional acceptance. People from these environments often learned, to stay connected, I must constantly defend my humanity. So adulthood became emotional performance. But emotionally intelligent people eventually stop auditioning for acceptance. They stop emotionally begging people to see their value. Not because they became cold. Because they finally began trusting themselves internally. This is the real reason emotionally intelligent people explain themselves less over time. Self-trust replaces emotional desperation. That transformation changes everything. The nervous system relaxes. Conversations feel lighter. Boundaries feel clearer. Silence feels less threatening. The body no longer experiences every misunderstanding as emotional danger. This creates freedom. Real freedom. The freedom to speak honestly, tolerate disagreement, survive misunderstandings, set boundaries calmly, stop emotionally performing, trust your own perception. Without collapsing psychologically every time someone disapproves. Most people never fully reach this point. They remain trapped inside perception management for decades. Trying desperately to appear acceptable, avoid criticism, gain approval, control interpretation. But emotionally intelligent people slowly understand, peace is impossible while constantly managing everyone else's emotional experience of you. That realization creates detachment. Healthy detachment. Not emotional numbness. The ability to allow others to misunderstand, disagree, project, judge, without abandoning yourself emotionally in response. This is rare strength. The kind of strength that does not need attention. The kind that remains calm under judgment. The kind that trusts private truth more than public opinion. And once someone develops this, their entire energy changes. They stop chasing. Stop over-explaining. Stop defending every part of themselves constantly. Instead, they communicate honestly. Then let life reveal who is genuinely capable of understanding them. This creates healthier relationships too. Because emotionally safe people do not require endless self-defense from you. Healthy people listen openly, respect boundaries, allow individuality, communicate directly. Tolerate differences without emotional punishment. Emotionally intelligent individuals become highly selective about who receives deep emotional access. Not from ego. From self-respect. Because they understand. Constant emotional self-defense destroys nervous system peace. So they protect peace intentionally. Not perfectly. But consciously. And perhaps the deepest truth of all is this: you stop explaining yourself constantly. The moment you finally trust that your worth does not depend on being perfectly understood by everyone around you,